From a tiny Italian torpedo boat in the Aegean, Captain Francesco Mimbelli watched 3 British cruisers and 4 destroyers close in through the dark. The smallest of them outweighed his ship 5 times over. Behind him, 21 fishing boats crawled toward Crete at 8 knots. They carried 2,300 German soldiers, an invasion force, racing to land before dawn. The British squadron was there to stop it. Searchlights would come soon. Once they did, the fishing boats wouldn't survive the first salvo. But Mimbelli commanded Lupo, Italian for wolf, a torpedo boat designed to fight under the nose of heavy escorts that believed themselves untouchable. The wolf didn't turn away, not while she had torpedoes in her tubes. By spring 1941, Nazi Germany had swept through Greece, and Crete was the next objective in Operation Merkur. German paratroops began landing on Crete on May 20th, 1941, but were urgently in need of reinforcements. The plan was to send additional Gebirgsjäger, or mountain troops, by sea in local fishing vessels and sailing boats, escorted by Italian naval units. The Regia Marina had only modest forces in the Aegean, a handful of torpedo boats, minesweepers, and submarines. Still, it carried out the risky job of ferrying German troops across waters patrolled by the Royal Navy. Lupo, Italian for wolf, was a tiny thing, a Speke-class torpedo boat, displacing only about 1,000 tons at full load, and armed with 300mm guns and 4 450mm torpedo tubes. The diminutive vessel was designed to work in tandem with larger task forces, tackling threats. Engaging an enemy on her own was unthinkable for a boat of its kind. Lupo, under Mimbelli's command, was stationed in the Greek Dodecanese and had already proven herself a tough combatant. Earlier in 1941, she had ambushed a British convoy in the Aegean and crippled the tanker Desmalia despite the convoy's heavy escort. Captain Mimbelli's bold reputation had grown to a point where in December 1940, he had been given command of the 8th Torpedo Boat Squadron, with Lupo as his flagship. On May 19, 1941, a sister torpedo boat, Sirio, was called upon to escort a crucial convoy of 21 small vessels carrying some 2,300 German soldiers to Crete. But Sirio faced engine trouble, forcing her to turn back. Then her replacement, Crotone, struck a mine and sank before reaching the convoy. With the invasion timetable slipping and the motley flotilla of caicques already at sea, Supa Marina, the Italian Naval Command, ordered Mimbelli's Lupo to take over the escort mission. For the next 2 days, the German troop convoy, essentially a ragtag fleet of sailboats and motor schooners, crept south from the Greek mainland toward Crete. None of these caicques had radios or navigation aids, making coordination nearly impossible. Mimbelli, a capable and hands-on commander, spent the daylight hours of May 21st rounding up the straggling transports and organizing them via shouted orders and flag signals. The wolf shepherded its flock diligently, but confusion reigned. Conflicting orders arrived from Athens, first commanding Lupo to halt the advance after an Italian scout plane spotted a Royal Navy force that would cross the convoy's path. The mission was cancelled, and new orders came, sending them racing back toward Milos Island. Then an hour later, reports suggested the enemy had changed course, and Mimbelli received another dispatch ordering full speed ahead to Crete later that day. Unbeknownst to the Italians and Germans, Admiral Andrew Cunningham, the British Commander-in-Chief Mediterranean, had indeed sent powerful naval forces to intercept any attempted sea landings in Crete. The Royal Navy still ruled the surface of the Mediterranean, and Cunningham was determined to prevent Axis reinforcements from reaching Crete's shores. As night fell, one of those forces, Force D, under Rear Admiral Irvine Glennie, was patrolling north of Crete. Glennie's squadron, nicknamed Force Delta by the Italians, was immensely superior to anything the Italians had in the area. It consisted of 3 light cruisers, HMS Ajax, HMS Orion, and HMS Dido, and 4 destroyers, HMS Hereward, HMS Hasty, Janus, and Kimberley. These British warships bristled with guns, the cruisers mounting multiple 5.25-inch or 6-inch guns, and critically carrying radar for night fighting. In contrast, Lupo had no radar and only 300mm guns as primary armament. The disparity was stark. Glenny's Force D could throw a volume of fire and locate targets in the dark, while the small torpedo boat could only pray for a miracle in a direct encounter. Captain Mimbelli was fully aware of his predicament when, just before midnight, the experienced lookouts on Lupo spotted enemy ships looming out of the darkness. The Italian convoy was about 5 miles north of Cape Spada when, at 11:33 p.m., a crewman shouted a warning. A British destroyer was sighted at close range off the starboard bow. This was HMS Janus, which had just discovered the shadowy shapes of the convoy and was turning to bring its guns to bear. In that heart-pounding moment, Mimbelli had to choose between fight or flight. Outrunning British destroyers was impossible. Lupo's only chance to save the convoy was to attack. Without hesitation, Mimbelli ordered full speed and wheeled Lupo into the attack. He signaled the German Caïques to scatter and reverse course back toward Greece. Lupo, meanwhile, heeled over as it made a sharp turn to bring its stern torpedo tubes to face the onrushing destroyer. At 11:34 p.m., at point-blank range, Lupo fired 2 torpedoes from her aft mounts at HMS Janus. The sudden launch caught the British by surprise, but Janus's quick course change caused both fish to miss their mark, frothing harmlessly past into the dark sea. Almost immediately, a larger shape emerged beyond the destroyers. One of the cruisers was coming into view. Mimbelli knew Lupo had only 2 torpedoes left in her forward tubes. He ordered them readied, and estimating the cruiser's speed and bearing in the darkness, fired his last 2 torpedoes at the bigger target. That target was likely HMS Dido, Admiral Glenny's flagship. Mimbelli guessed the cruiser was making 20 knots and was about 700 meters away. In reality, Dido was moving faster at around 28 knots, so Lupo's torpedoes ended up running just behind their intended victim. The night erupted in violence. The British, now fully alerted, opened fire with a withering barrage. Tracer shells and flares streaked across the sky as the cruisers and destroyers targeted the lone Italian torpedo boat. Lupo laid down a smokescreen in an attempt to meet the convoy's retreat, enveloping the area in darkness and smoke. British lookouts trained to distinguish friend from foe in the melee. The Royal Navy ships began maneuvering aggressively, and in the confusion, HMS Dido nearly collided with Lupo, passing just a few meters astern of the tiny Italian boat as Mimbelli steered hard to avoid a crash. For a moment, Lupo was literally in the midst of the enemy formation. The British warships blasted away with every available gun. Waterspouts bracketed Lupo as shells splashed around her, and soon she was hit. Inside Lupo, the impacts were devastating. Numerous large-caliber shells struck the Italian torpedo boat during the clash. The hull was pierced in multiple places, the deck torn and twisted by explosions. The British barrage was lethally precise, with 18 shells finding their target. Yet, by an incredible stroke of luck, only 3 of those shells actually exploded. The rest were duds that skimmed through with no detonation. Even so, damage was piling up. Shrapnel ravaged Lupo's bridge and upper works. 2 Italian sailors, Orazio Indelicato and Niccolo Moccole, were cut down during the onslaught. Another 26 of Mimbelli's crew were wounded in those few chaotic minutes. Amid the smoke and thunder, Lupo's gunners defiantly fired back with their 100mm guns, trying to keep the British heads down. As Lupo briefly disappeared in her own smokescreen, in the blinding flash of gunfire, the British formation was thrown into disarray. The sudden attack by this single Italian ship had been so audacious that the British reportedly thought they were under attack by multiple enemy vessels, not just one. One Royal Navy report after the battle indicated the attackers were initially suspected to be a group of Italian destroyers. Mimbelli's lone Lupo had moved so fast and aggressively that it seemed like several ships at once. In the chaos, the tragic friendly fire episode made the situation for the British much more unfortunate. HMS Dido inadvertently trained its 40mm anti-aircraft guns on what it thought was an enemy target, and ended up raking the cruiser HMS Orion with gunfire. Orion took several hits from Dido's close-range pom-poms, suffering minor damage but losing 2 sailors on her bridge. Meanwhile, Mimbelli's torpedoes, though missing Dido, had not gone entirely to waste. Seconds after Lupo's last torpedo salvo, 2 tremendous explosions erupted in the water near HMS Orion. The torpedoes ran past Dido and detonated not far from Orion's hull. While they did not score a direct hit, the concussive blast shook Orion and warped her hull, causing flooding and machinery upsets. Officers aboard Orion initially feared they had been torpedoed amidships. Combined with the friendly fire and the enveloping smoke, the sudden damage added to the Royal Navy's momentary confusion. Inside Lupo, Captain Mimbelli seized the opportunity his ambush had created. With the British line thrown off balance, 1 cruiser damaged, a destroyer dodging torpedoes, and gunners disoriented by smoke and darkness, he ordered evasive action. Lupo, already moving at flank speed, heeled into a sharp turn and slipped through a gap between the British ships, running for open water. 1 British cruiser loomed so close to Lupo during this escape that the Italian crew reportedly saw its massive hull rushing by in the dark, just a few meters away. The little torpedo boat had miraculously survived a point-blank engagement with an entire squadron and was now racing away, battered but alive. But Lupo's victory would come at a dire cost. Rear Admiral Glennie, recovering from the shock of this ambush, regrouped his force. Thanks to their superior radar, the British soon relocated the scattering convoy of caïques once Lupo's smokescreen drifted away. With Lupo temporarily driven off, the cruisers and destroyers gave chase to the fleeing troop boats. For the next 2 hours, in the middle of that moonless night, the Royal Navy hunted down the defenseless transport craft. Some caught fire and burned brightly on the waves. Others broke apart, spilling men and equipment into the sea. The British warships methodically shelled any vessel they could find, and by the early hours of May 22nd, they had destroyed more than half the convoy. At least 10 of the troop-laden boats were confirmed sunk or left burning, according to later Italian accounts. Yet Mimbelli's sacrificial attack was not in vain. His 1-ship torpedo charge had bought time and sowed enough confusion to allow many of the convoy vessels to escape. In the darkness, at least 6 of the caïques managed to slip away in the opposite direction and eventually limp back to the Greek coast. Only 2 of the original craft actually reached Crete. 1 caïque that landed about 3 officers and 110 German mountain troops on an isolated point of the coast, and 1 small cutter that landed a handful of soldiers who were promptly intercepted by Allied forces ashore. Thanks to Lupo's intervention, about 2/3 of the 2,300-man German detachment survived. Contemporary estimates of the Axis losses varied. Italian sources at the time believed around 800 German soldiers perished in the failed landing attempt, whereas later research indicates a lower toll of roughly 297 lives. As dawn approached on May 22nd, Glennie's Force D found itself low on ammunition after the night's expenditure. Compounding their troubles, daybreak would bring swarming Luftwaffe air attacks. Having largely achieved the mission of preventing a seaborne landing, the British squadron withdrew before first light, heading south to get out of range of German bombers and to rearm. This withdrawal would prove wise. Later that very day, other British ships that lingered too long off Crete were caught by Luftwaffe dive bombers and suffered heavy losses, including the sinking of 2 cruisers. But Force D was now en route to Alexandria, its crews undoubtedly shaken and exhausted from the ferocious night engagement against a rabid lone wolf dancing in the shadows. With the enemy gone, the battered Lupo emerged from hiding to perform one final act of gallantry. Captain Mimbelli turned his damaged ship back toward the debris-strewn waters to look for survivors. At significant risk, Lupo spent the early morning of May 22nd rescuing survivors from the sunken caïques. The Italian sailors pulled scores of oil-soaked, half-drowned German soldiers out of the sea. By mid-morning, Lupo had crammed aboard as many survivors as feasible and then set course for safer waters. In an ironic twist of fate, the wolf had turned lifeguard. When Lupo limped into port, she presented a shattered spectacle. Photographs taken after the action show Lupo's hull and superstructure riddled with holes, a result of the 18 shell hits she endured. Word of the night's event spread quickly through the Regia Marina. The exploit was dubbed the Lupo Convoy Action, and it instantly entered Italian naval lore. Lupo's tiny ensign would soon be decorated with the Silver Medal of Military Valor for the engagement, and Captain Mimbelli, who had audaciously chosen to attack against all odds, was awarded Italy's highest bravery award, the Gold Medal of Military Valor, for saving most of the convoy through his actions. The official Italian medal citation even claimed that Lupo had sunk a British cruiser during the fight, an understandable exaggeration in the fog of war, as in reality, no Royal Navy ship was lost that night, apart from damage inflicted on Orion. The British, for their part, were forced to acknowledge the extraordinary courage of their opponent, even as they tallied their success in aborting the landing. Rear Admiral Glennie came under some criticism from his superiors after the battle. Despite his force's overwhelming strength, a single enemy torpedo boat had not only escaped, but also defended the convoy long enough that a sizable portion of it got away. Glennie's report to Cunningham detailed how his ships expended a great deal of ammunition and even suffered slight damage in the night action. Rumors circulated that British sailors initially thought they'd been engaged by a pack of Italian vessels rather than just one. Indeed, Mimbelli's Lupo earned the Royal Navy's grudging respect that night. One British naval officer would later concede that the stand of Lupo was, quote, as brave in action as any seen in the Mediterranean campaign. After the Battle of Crete episode, Lupo sailed into legend as, quote, the luckiest ship in the Italian Navy, and she would continue to tempt fate in the turbulent waters of the Mediterranean. Following repairs and refit in mid-1941, Lupo returned to active duty, operating from bases in the Aegean Sea. In October 1941, while escorting a convoy from Crete, Lupo attempted another rescue under fire. Her sister ship Altair struck a mine, and Lupo rushed alongside in the darkness to take off Altair's crew before the stricken ship sank. A month later, in November 1941, Lupo and another torpedo boat, Cassiopeia, were assigned to escort two German cargo ships from Greece to North Africa. As fate would have it, the convoy encountered the Royal Navy's formidable Force K, two fast cruisers and two destroyers in the open sea. Once again, facing a hopeless disparity, Lupo did not shy from the battle. Now a frigate captain, Mimbelli repeated his Crete tactics. He charged at the British warships to divert their attention, while Cassiopeia tried to shepherd the merchants to safety. A furious night action ensued. Despite Lupo's courageous attack, the two German freighters were sunk by British gunfire, and Lupo herself was damaged by shell hits in the fray. Once again, though, Lupo survived the encounter, limping away where lesser ships might have been destroyed. It seemed nothing could put down the lucky wolf. Captain Mimbelli's aggressive leadership in these convoy actions earned him further acclaim. By early 1942, he was reassigned to command a flotilla of Motoscafo Armato Silurante torpedo motorboats in the Black Sea, carrying with him the reputation forged at Crete. Lupo continued service under new commanders after Mimbelli's transfer. In 1942, she served continuously, escorting convoys between Italy, Greece, and North Africa on vital supply runs, often threatened by Allied submarines and aircraft. In September 1942, Lupo and three of her sister torpedo boats escorted a convoy to Tobruk. They endured repeated air attacks. Bombs fell around them, and one merchant was hit and had to turn back, but Lupo and the remaining ships safely reached port. Later that month, Lupo escorted another three-ship convoy from Crete to Libya, surviving an encounter with a prowling British submarine. Each mission tested stretching Lupo's luck to the absolute limit. Finally, the wolf tempted fate one time too many. On the night of December 1st through 2nd, 1942, Lupo was part of the Veloce convoy, escorting two Italian merchants from Naples to Tripoli. The Allied air and sea dominance had grown by this time. Malta-based aircraft struck the convoy, crippling the Veloce with bombs and setting her ablaze. In the darkness and confusion, the convoy scattered. Lupo, displaying the same loyalty to her charges that she had at Crete, refused to abandon the burning freighter. She pulled alongside Veloce to render assistance and rescue survivors while the other ships fled. This gallant decision sealed her fate. At dawn on December 2nd, a British destroyer flotilla, led by HMS Jervis, that had been hunting the convoy, found Lupo and the stricken freighter south of the Kirkena banks off Tunisia. 4 enemy destroyers closed in. This time, there was no darkness or confusion to aid Lupo, no friendly air cover, and her luck had run out. The British destroyers opened a merciless fire. Within minutes, the little torpedo boat was torn to pieces and sank in a fiery blaze. Lupo sank quickly, followed shortly by the hulk of Veloce. Out of Lupo's crew of 164, only 29 men were found alive in the water to be rescued at daylight by an Italian corvette. Her last captain, Corvette Captain Giuseppe Folli, went down with the ship. In just over 2 years of war, she charted an extraordinary combat record, from the narrow escapes and fierce skirmishes of early 1941 to her final stand in late 1942. But it was her epic fight on the night of May 22, 1941, off Crete, that immortalized her name. Captain Francesco Mimbelli survived the war and rose to the ranks of the post-war Italian Navy. Fittingly, the Navy later renamed a destroyer Francesco Mimbelli in his honor. His gold medal citation praised his, quote, mirabile audacia, admirable boldness in taking on far superior forces at Crete. To this day, Italian naval lore remembers how Lupo, quote, fooled Force D. The action off Crete showed the world that courage and skill could, in fleeting moments, level the playing field, even against overwhelming odds.